1941, American animation company Fleischer Studios would release a 10-minute short simply titled Superman, or later known as The Mad Scientist. Ooh. It was the first film, animated or otherwise, to feature the character of Superman, who made his official debut in Action Comics issue number 1 just 3 years prior. But you already knew that. Come to think of it, you likely already knew of this Superman short, and the 16 following animated short films commonly known as the Fleischer Superman cartoons. What you might not know is the history behind them, why they were made, who made them, and just how much of an impact they had on the character, superhero fiction, and pop culture in general. So join me as we take a journey back in time to the 1940s, not like super long ago, I guess, and uncover the history of Fleischer's Superman. So, of course, the story of the Fleischer Superman series begins with DC Comics' longtime parent company, Paramount. Actually, by the early 40s, it would have been impossible for any company to own DC because there was no DC to own. At the time, comic books featuring characters like Batman, Wonder Woman, and, of course, Superman were published by National Comic Publications, which wouldn't be rebranded as DC until 1977. Actually, beginning in the early 40s, the company would begin rebranding itself as Superman DC, the DC referring to Detective Comics, the series where Batman made his debut. This is kind of funny when you realize that nowadays when we say DC Comics, we're technically saying Detective Comics. Kinda like how when we call this thing an ATM machine, we're calling it an automated teller machine. Jesus, I got off track. Anyway, Paramount, after acquiring the rights from National Publications, decided to produce a Superman short film. But given the rather limited technology afforded to live-action filmmaking at the time, they turned instead to the medium without limits: animation. For said animation, Paramount would reach out, of course, to their very own Fleischer Studios. Founded in 1929 by brothers Max and Dave Fleischer, Fleischer Studios produced cartoons that, at the time, rivaled the success of Walt Disney Animation, particularly with their successful run of Popeye cartoons starting in 1933. They're also notable for animating the 1939 film Gulliver's Travels, which has the honor of being the second animated feature film produced by an American studio. Do I even need to tell you what the first one was? Anyway, while running their own animation studio out of Miami and not wanting to be overworked while developing their next feature film, not to mention their lack of interest in having Paramount dictate what cartoons they would make, Max and Dave initially refused the call to produce a Superman short, let alone multiple. This is a well-known bit of trivia, but it's worth repeating. Max and Dave's bargaining posture for how they would go about dissuading Paramount from getting them to make the cartoon went something like this. Excuse me, Mr. Mount?
Oh, Max, if it isn't our #1 animator. How's that Superman short coming along?
Oh, gee, I mean about that. Gosh, you know we just love to, but we did the math and I'm afraid it's just not possible. I mean, $100,000 to make just one of these, let alone a bunch of them? And that's in 1941 money. You can imagine how much that'll be worth in like 80 years or so.
What an odd thing to say.
Oh, and the time it would take too. Ugh, golly gee, 6 months per short? I'm afraid it just can't be done, Mr. Mount.
$100,000 does seem a bit pricey.
I'm glad you've seen reason.
But $50,000?
Okay.
That's more like it. I mean, it's still twice as much as a normal cartoon costs. And the time? Oh, that's not a problem. I mean, what's 6 months anyway?
183 days, sir.
Ah, come on. You'll be fine. Depression's over. We got money to spend and 6 months to do it. Chop, chop.
Yeah, so Paramount kinda called Fleischer's bluff, and they still ended up with twice as much money as they might have if they just agreed right away. Did you get us out of making the Superman cartoon? No. But I did nab us $50,000 to make the first one. Produced and directed by Max and Dave Fleischer, respectively, from a story by Seymour Needle and Isidore Sparber, the film premiered on September 26, 1941. following the simple story of how Lois Lane sets out to get a story on a titular mad scientist who's just threatened Metropolis with his electrothanasia ray, leading to her capture, of course, and rescue by Superman, who also saves the city and defeats the mad scientist. This is pretty much the most archetypal Superman, hell, superhero story you can imagine. You got the mad scientist, you got the death ray, you got the damsel in distress, and you've got the dashing hero, the Man of Steel himself in this case, swooping in to save the day. The short was a hit upon release, as evidenced by it being nominated for an Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film in 1942. Yes, before there was a Best Animated Feature, animation already had a short film category. Pretty cool, pretty cool. Superman in this short was voiced by Bud Collyer, reprising his role from the Adventures of Superman radio serial that started airing the previous year. Also joining him from that series were Joan Alexander as Lois Lane and Julian Noah as Perry White. As well, we've got Jack Mercer as the mad scientist, and if you don't know who that is, well, maybe this'll clue you in.
It's not over there. Here's another one over here. That's good.
And the last returning cast member from the radio serial I'll mention is Jackson Beck, the narrator, who pioneered this iconic opener.
Faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings at a single bound.
Which, thanks to these shorts and the radio show, which adopted the same saying, would become a long-standing catchphrase forever attached to Superman. Before we continue with the production history, let's talk a little about the art direction for this show. Firstly, I want to point out that Superman's design in the comics hadn't been fully finalized by this time. I mean, the basic silhouette was there more or less from day one. Day zero looked like this, in case you're wondering. But throughout the early comics run, subtle details would be shifted around or altered slightly, most notably the S on Superman's chest. These shorts continue on in that tradition and have Superman sporting a black S symbol instead of the more iconic yellow, something that was toyed with from time to time in the comics. I'll say as much that I think it looks pretty cool, and generally speaking, the art in this series is really good. It's got that great old comic book or cartoon style that just looks wonderful. Aiding in that is the actual animation itself, which is fantastic. You can really see the money on screen in every shot, and while some scenes were rotoscoped, meaning they animated over footage of live action actors, a lot of it was just straight up hand drawn from the ground up. That's not to say everything's perfect. There are some individual stills or even a few seconds of footage that look a bit creepy, but these are few and far between, and the animation is so impressive that I don't really mind if it looks awkward at times. It's still wonderful. Following the Mad Scientist, 8 remaining shorts were released by Fleischer Studios over the next 11 months. Each of them followed a similar pattern of very sci-fi oriented, action-packed stories featuring giant robots, giant dinosaurs, giant gorillas, earthquakes, volcanoes, the works. Fleischer's Superman's animated canon had entered into a groove that it was occupying quite snugly. What are these words trickling off of my fingers as I write this? Unfortunately, while the shorts enjoyed success in front of the scenes, behind them, things weren't so peachy. By late 1941, Max and Dave were having trouble cooperating, culminating in Dave leaving Fleischer Studios and Miami altogether. Having had enough of the behind-the-scenes brothers spat, Paramount removed Max from his own company and rebranded it as Famous Studios. Fleischer Studios alums Seymour Needle, Isidore Sparber, Sam Buchwald, and Dan Gordon were placed in charge of production, and the series continued with 8 additional shorts being released between late 1942 and mid-1943. While the animation and voices remained unchanged, there was a noticeable shift in the storylines being portrayed in the new Famous Studios incarnation. To illustrate this point, let's compare a random title from the initial batch of shorts, say this one right here, The Mechanical Monsters, to a title of the first Famous Studios film. No comment. Actually, I have several. Yes, with World War II in full force, film companies were looking to show their support for the Allies in any way they could. Because of this, many animation studios around the time were relegated to being, well, propaganda dispensers and little else. Famous Studios and their Superman lineup were no exception. Gone were the days of science fiction plots featuring mad scientists and mecha monstrosities. In their place were shorts featuring Superman taking on a different kind of evil, if you will. Yeah, if you're one of those people who misses the days when cartoons weren't so gosh darn political, I'd recommend stopping short of the 1940s, since these were the kinds of cartoons being made around that time. Wasn't all bad though. We got a new intro.
Faster than a streak of lightning. More powerful than the pounding surf. Mightier than a roaring hurricane.
Which wasn't nearly as recognizable as the first, as evidenced by this being the first time you've heard it, don't lie. But hey, it says he's now faster than a bolt of lightning, which, compared to a speeding bullet, is quite the upgrade, so I guess Wartime Soups really needed the speed boost. War makes superhuman aliens faster. Outside of that, there's not much more to go over. The famous studio shorts may have looked and sounded the same, but without Popeye as a mad scientist in an episode called The Bulleteers, could it ever really hope to feel the same? Paramount thought similarly, as after these shorts finished releasing, they were unceremoniously replaced with Little Lulu, also based on a comic strip. The immense production cost and waning interest in the shorts were cited as reasons for their cancellation. With a total of 17 short films released over a period of 2 years, you can't say they overstayed their welcome. While that's more or less all there is to tell about the shorts' creation and history, the one other aspect that's definitely worth going over is the incredible influence and legacy they've left behind, even over 8 decades later. Some of the most famous parts of Superman as a character and the superhero genre owe themselves to these cartoons. So let's talk about them. Firstly, this was one of the first pieces of Superman media to actually show him flying. Yeah, remember that line from the opening?
Able to leap tall buildings at a single bound.
That was supposed to be the original idea. Think less modern Superman and more Hulk in regards to leaping prowess. But the Fleischer brothers thought it looked stupid, so they just made him fly. It sounds like I'm kidding, but I am not. Technically, this wasn't the first time Superman's flight was depicted. There were comics and, again, the radio show prior that showed this, but these shorts were definitely the first visual medium to popularize it and have it be on purpose, not an art mishap like it was in previous comic issues. There's also the immense impact of the show's art style. This harsh, minimal Art Deco look would go on to serve as one of the primary inspirations for, and you probably saw this coming, but here it goes anyway, Batman the Animated Series, and by extension, the rest of the DC animated universe. Comic book artists like Alex Ross and even directors like Hayao Miyazaki have been inspired by these shorts, and generally speaking, before the Christopher Reeve films, these were the definitive Superman media to many outside of the comics. But does that mean you should bother watching them? Let's get this out of the way. If you're at all a fan of the character, cartoons, or even just have a passing interest in animation in general, yes, watch these. Now. They're public domain and they're all up on YouTube. Don't even waste your time watching this. What if you're not? What if you don't care? Or maybe you do care, but not enough to drop what you're doing and watch them right away, assuming you haven't already. Is there still something worth recommending? Well, these shorts are incredibly formulaic. What happens? Something goes wrong. It looks like a job for Superman. He suits up, stops the bad guys, Lois is in peril at some point, lather, rinse, repeat. If that sounds like it would get old fast, then I'd recommend giving these a skip. If you don't mind seeing the same setup over and over, slightly tweaked, then you might mind the fact that character progression or identification in these shorts is kept to a minimum. Dialogue is sparse, and no one's personality really goes beyond what's already common background knowledge to a modern audience member anyway. What do you already know about Superman? It's all here, and nothing else. Same for Lois, Perry White, and No, those are the only recurring characters. Also, speaking of Lois, yeah, she does get captured and rescued a lot, although I gotta say, she is more active in these than I was expecting. I mean, she is going out into the field on all these missions. She has a little bit of that spunk that would become a character staple later on. It even saves Clark Kent's life at one point. Well, okay, she didn't actually save him, he would have been fine, but she thought she was saving him. A for effort. All in all, her presence in these shorts could have aged worse, but if the mere sight of a woman having to be saved by a man, even a superpowered Kryptonian one, makes you want to switch off, then that's one more reason to pass on these. For everyone else remaining, I'll say that it's important to look at these shorts through the right lens in order to fully enjoy them. These were made at a time when a strong story and characters wasn't what you came to animation like this for. You came to see spectacle, to see set pieces, visual storytelling, to just have a bit of fun. If there's one positive descriptor I could put on these shorts, it would be fun. You enjoy these kinds of things on a more primal level. Who cares if there's barely any plot? You just want to see Superman punch the big dinosaur, don't you? Think of it like a Tom and Jerry cartoon, except instead of slapstick, it's Superman fighting a dinosaur. Above all else, it delivers on what it promises. But of course, the main reason to watch any of these is the pop cultural impact of their existence, especially as it relates to the character himself. Thanks to these shorts, we now have so much Superman iconography that may have been lost or taken decades to materialize otherwise. That rhymed. And in being so bare bones and stripped of anything even remotely complex, it kind of works in the short's favor as just delivering the ultimate Superman starter pack. By not getting caught up in its own deviations or trying to expand the universe or put its own spin on it, it delivers a rendition of the character that's pretty definitive in my eyes. Very much like Batman the Animated Series. You know how that show just is Batman for a lot of people? In a similar vein, I feel that these shorts just are Superman. Does that make them as good as BTAS? I don't know if I'd go that far, but they do work on a very similar level. They might not be the best, or even your personal favorite, but you take one look at them, and you just think Superman.